This is Stories of Medicine and Migration. And what we're doing is celebrating South Asian Heritage Month 2025. Roots to Roots is the theme of this year's South Asian Heritage event. And I think what we're doing for this event is very suited to that theme. This is the very first time that 3 medical royal colleges from the United Kingdom have come together to actually share and discuss and explore what we're doing, looking at the history of South Asian medics coming to the United Kingdom. And we've got, as you can see, a range of speakers who are going to be coming from different perspectives, different geographic locations. I'm Claire McDade. I'm the Heritage Lead at the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow. But I want to pay tribute to Thiba tonight, who actually is probably the person, Thiba Krishnamurti, who actually brought this event or kick-started this event for us by reaching out on LinkedIn back in December and just asking some questions and making connections from London to Glasgow to Edinburgh about, you know, all the different Indian, South Asian, it's not just Indian, it's South Asian medics who have come to the UK. It's very important for us that, given how important migration and people coming from all parts of the world to the United Kingdom due to empire, due to colonialism, but now with the nature of our NHS and so many people coming from all over the world to make the NHS the incredible thing that it is today, we're looking at the roots of all that and wanting to go back and find out more about how did all this come about, basically, and what do our archives and our records show and tell about how all this came about. I think that's probably all I need to say at the moment. So I'm going to hand over to our very first speaker, and this is Liz Douglas, who is Senior Curator at the Royal College of Physicians of London. And I'll stop talking now and hand straight over to Liz.
So as Claire said, hello everyone. My name is Liz Douglas. I'm Senior Curator at the Royal College of Physicians of London. I'm delighted to be part of this conversation for South Asian Heritage Month, and also would like to pay tribute to Thiba for starting the ball rolling. The period of history I've been researching is mid-19th century to turn of the 20th century. My presentation summarises the historical context of early physicians in London. Although it is South Asian focused, the records are mostly of Indian physicians, looking at the structural barriers that they faced. I then highlight 5 interesting individuals that I will share with you later. And the main sources I've been using are the RCP's membership lists, the cash books, so who is paying fees to the college, the signature books of the licentiates, and what's known as the Monk's Roll, which is an obituary series of fellows, now also known as inspiring physicians. So while I wish to celebrate and share some of the extraordinary doctors I've come across, I fully acknowledge that the institutional records I've used portray certain historical and cultural biases, such as Indian medical knowledge was often derided by Western medicine and portrayed as being primitive. Western doctoring was framed as superior and often part of a, quote, civilizing mission. There were sort of a 2-tier colonial framework of British medicine, which made it extremely difficult for Indians in particular to succeed to the highest positions of medicine. And also something about the hierarchical structure of the Royal College of Physicians itself also made it extremely difficult to succeed. So with all of those factors in mind, who ends up represented in the college archives is therefore shaped by these greater structural barriers and prejudicial beliefs. An interesting sort of example of these colonial biases can be read in the London Journal of Medicine from 1851. Just going to move my face out of the way as I can't see it. So in this article, it's a review of a lecture given by Alan Webb, who is a surgeon in the Bengal Army. The lecture was called "The Historical Relations of Ancient Hindu with Greek Medicine in Connection with the Study of Modern Medical Science in India." So within it, he celebrates the first 4 Indian medical students who come to study in London, and that's the image of them there. But within it, the article frames indigenous Indian knowledge as being backwards, calling pre-1835 Indian medicine, quote, "a time of professional darkness," implying that medicine only began with European intervention, which of course we know is not true. The editor diminishes centuries of Indian medicine, despite later acknowledging some advanced ancient surgical practices. So, for example, lithotomy, cataract surgeries, which all predated European practices. But the editor frames this as being an interesting curiosity, not as evidence of a scientific tradition in its own right. Going onwards, he also talks about the ultimate goal of this mission of having 4 Indian doctors study in London was not only about medical competence, but also ultimately about conversion to Christianity and acceptance of European cultural norms, which he describes as, quote, "the comforts and blessings of Christianity." These Indian doctors are held up as examples of what, quote, "less civilized nations could achieve by embracing European knowledge." So the 4 Indian doctors who came to study in London, this was happening amongst other countries as well. So representatives from Persia, from Hawaii, from Abyssinia, medical students had also gone to Paris to study. And so on the right-hand side of the image is Sergio Kumar Goodeve Chakrabarti. And together with Balanath Bose, Gopal Chandra Seal, and another student, Dwarkanath Basu, they arrive in London and start their studies at University College London. They are sponsored by the physician Professor Henry Goodeve, who is a mentor of Chakrabarti, and Chakrabarti adopts his name, Goodeve, after converting to Christianity. In 1849, Chakrabarti earns his MD from University College London. At that point, he also becomes a member of the Royal College of Surgeons of London, and he serves with the Medical College of Bengal when he returns to India. So interestingly, at this time, there is a change in law, which means that Indians can now take a competitive examination in the civil service. But the big caveat is that you have to study in London and pass this examination in London. So a system that's meant to be meritocratic is actually incredibly prohibitive for Indian practitioners of medicine at the time. That said, Chakrabarti does take the examination in London and becomes the first Indian student to pass the examination and become part of the Indian medical service, eventually becoming Surgeon Major. Unfortunately, the other 3 students who studied with him aged out. They became too old to sit the examination. So from this, it's sort of a clear rationale as to why Indian students wanted to study in London, in Britain, and in the UK. It was to progress within this colonial framework of British-controlled India. So while the Act opened civil service examinations to Indians in theory, in reality, it created a major practical and financial barrier for most. Therefore, in the examples I go on to pick out, it's often Indian students from affluent classes or those who have sponsorship who come to study in London in the 19th century. Okay. As a representation of what is in the RCP's archives, it is characterised by their relationship, so by doctors' relationships to the college, i.e. what class of membership that they had. So in the 19th century, you had these sort of three classes of membership. At the top, you have the fellows. So this class of membership is almost completely closed to Indian doctors. And the only example I found is sort of in the mid to late 19th century. And he is a third generation Anglo-Indian doctor, who I'll come to later. And then in the middle, you have the members. So effectively closed to most Indian doctors in the 19th century, with a few exceptions. Memberships were exam-based, but the exams were held in London, again, practically prohibitive. Even after the Medical Act of 1858, which slightly widened access, colonial students faced the expensive travel to London, the discrimination in the admissions itself. But there were examples, there were a few Indian doctors in the 19th century who did gain the qualification, the MRCP, usually after a period of further study in the UK. And then finally, the licentiates. Perhaps this is the most accessible route for Indian doctors in the 19th century. And amongst these records, for example, lists of licentiate members is where you will see the South Asian names start to appear. So the LRCP, or the licentiate qualification, could be obtained by passing the college's licensing exams, and those with certain recognised colonial medical school qualifications could be eligible. For example, Calcutta Medical College, Madras Medical College also. So, but for most, Indian doctors would need to train partly in Britain or take exams in Britain, and also rely on recommendations from British medical authorities in India. So what this all means is this hierarchy meant that in 19th century Britain, an Indian doctor could be legally qualified, but ultimately still socially and professionally marginalised within the RCP's own ranks. And this is an inequality that is mirrored in hospital appointments and colonial service promotions. So on to some of the extraordinary doctors that I wanted to share with you. This is Dr. Jayakar, who is perhaps the first South Asian Indian licentiate of the RCP of London. He achieves this qualification in 1867. So his background, he studies at Grant Medical College in now Mumbai, was Bombay, which was one of the oldest medical colleges in South Asia. One of the oldest Western medical colleges in South Asia. He had a sponsorship to come to travel, to study in Britain, and he received a placement at Royal Victoria Hospital in Southampton. He passed his examinations in London to join the Indian Medical Service, that civil service qualification that I mentioned earlier. And as I say, became licentiate in 1867, which is incredibly early. There you can see his name highlighted. This is it from our membership lists there. So the first South Asian name that I spotted in this list. He had an absolutely fascinating career. He was stationed to Muscat to serve in the Indian Medical Service. He became a political agent to the Sultan of Oman, and was also his personal doctor. Although he was medical, history sort of remembers him more for his achievements in zoology and linguistics, where his name most appears in literature today. So as a political agent, he had a direct relationship with the Sultan, and was, as his personal doctor, he played this important role in internal diplomacy. So that is our first licentiate. Next up, I'd like to share Dr. Cowrie, who practiced in Bombay and later lived in London. He compiled a 2-volume work on medicine, and in particular medical plants of Western India and traditional treatments. He came from a Parsi family, so ethnically Zoroastrian extraction, in Bombay, and also studied at the Grant Medical College in Mumbai, was Bombay. He obtained a diploma of the LLCP in 1870 and graduated MD from Brussels. On the right hand side, you can see all of his accolades, all of his accomplishments, but the one that featured in our archives is obviously the membership of the Royal College of Physicians. So in this book, he studies the medicinal plants of Western India, including indigenous Indian medicine practiced by Vaids or Hakims. So he outlines that for millions of Indians, they could not or did not wish to access Western medicine. So his purpose was to classify and supply medical men with a knowledge of the various drugs and remedies used in India. And then the other place that I spotted him was in this cash book, where he is paying his membership fees there. Okay, so up to Dr. Dosabai Dadaboy Nay Patel. So she was a lifelong advocate of mother and baby health. She was an Indian obstetrician, gynecologist, teacher, campaigner. You can see her signature there, with the little asterisk next to it, which says she's the first woman to pass this examination. And the examination referred to is the licentiate examination. So she is the second woman ever to be acknowledged by the Royal College of Physicians of London. And she is the first woman to pass the licentiate examination. She also has a lot of other accolades. So she's the first member of the Royal College of Surgeons, first woman member of the Royal College of Surgeons in the same year of 1910. She similarly attended Grant Medical College. She then studies in London at the Royal Free, the School of Medicine for Women. She completed her doctorate at the London School of Tropical Medicine in 1912, making her the first woman to do so. And that amazing group photo of her wearing the white blouse, where she is shoulder to shoulder with all of the other male students there in 1912. So on qualifying, she returns to India to begin a career in obstetrics and gynecology. She forms welfare clinics for maternal and infant health. And there is also a Dosabai Dadaboy oration in her memory. And then on to Dr. Frederick Akbar Mohammed, a name that appeared in the book Asians in Britain, 400 Years of History, who I hadn't come across before, but is absolutely fascinating. I think it was a recommendation from one of the people in this group. I think Monique, I think you mentioned it. Anyway, so Dr. Frederick Horatio Henry Akbar Mohammed was from an Indian, English and Irish family. Grandson of Sheikh Dean Mohammed. So for anyone who's familiar with Brighton history, he was a figure who set up a very famous health spa in Brighton, and was known as the shampooing surgeon of Brighton, So shampooing at this time means sort of vigorous massage, vapor baths, that sort of thing, which was patronised by the then Prince Regent. So he comes from this health background, but he's the first to become a medical doctor. So he is born in Brighton, privately educated, and studies medicine at Sussex County Hospital, and later gets an appointment at Guy's Hospital. He qualifies as member of the Royal College of Surgeons and becomes fellow of the RCP at a very precociously young age of just 31. The other thing to note about him is if you look at his dates, he only lives to the age of 35. But in that time, he has this absolutely brilliant but very brief career. So following jobs in Highgate, Islington, Paddington, he is medical registrar at Guy's. He qualifies for a Bachelor of Medicine from King's College, Cambridge. But part of the residency criteria is that he must live in Cambridge, which he didn't. So how he got around that was he commuted between London and Cambridge twice a week to complete his studies, which is remarked upon in his Inspiring Physicians entry. So the picture below there, while he was a student, Mohammed modified the sphygmograph to measure blood pressure. So his enhanced design allowed doctors to record pulse waveforms, and he did this while he was a student. He was noted as the first person in Britain to recognise that high blood pressure was a primary condition of kidney damage and not the other way around. And as I said, sadly, at the age of 35, he catches typhoid fever. But while he is ill in hospital, his mentors, so the then president of the RCP, Sir Samuel Wilkes, as well as Sir William Broadbent, try to treat him. But sadly, this sort of the ultimate conclusion of the 24-day illness is that he dies of this hemorrhagic fever that he knew was coming, but the medicine at the time was sort of powerless to prevent. So when he dies, also there is a subscription set up in his memory to support his young family, and within that list, it's his mentors at Guy's, the president of the College of Physicians have donated. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson donates as well, and in his obituaries, it's remarked upon about this this great physician of this generation who is cut down in his prime. And then just quickly, the portraits of him there is a portrait from Brighton Museum, which is an amazing thing, and I haven't seen it in person just yet. I'm aware that I don't have much time, so I'm just going to whiz through. This was a late find in my research, but arguably one of the most important modern doctors in India. Is found in the membership list there. So Dr. Bidhan Chandra Roy, also known as BC Roy. So his birth and death date on the 1st of July is marked in India as National Doctors' Day. Roy was instrumental in setting up the Indian Medical Association and the Medical Council of India. The Indian Medical Association was established in 1928, primarily to organise medical professionals during the Indian independence movement. He becomes a member of the Royal College of Physicians and also of Surgeons in 1911. After returning home, he teaches at Calcutta Medical College. Amongst other things, he was also Mahatma Gandhi's personal doctor. He became the second and last Premier of West Bengal in 1948 as well. So the reason I was really excited to see him is also because this is sort of marking the end of sort of medical regulation by the centre by the UK, and this is when Indian medical associations and medical councils are starting to be established by figures such as Dr. BC Roy. So the key takeaways from my research is that Obviously, early South Asian doctors, in particular Indian doctors, played a crucial role in shaping British medicine. My final slide there. Today, we're very proud to have Dr. Mumtaz Patel as the RCP's 123rd president. She is a nephrologist, and within her own career, she touched upon the sort of racial and structural barriers that she faced. She said that her journey into medicine was not so straightforward, and there is no way she thought as a young girl she could aspire to do all the things that she had done over the years. She is a first-generation Indo-Asian Muslim female, born and bred in the northwest of England from a working-class background with non-medical parents. And back in the 1980s, she felt that many of her friends did not feel they would be able to pursue an academic career given her backgrounds. So that is sort of a whistle-stop tour of some of my research, including sort of 5 key figures that I've pulled out, and ending with our current president, Dr. Mumtaz Patel. I'm going to pass over to Edinburgh, which I'm very excited to say. So over to Daisy, and I will mute myself, I think.
Yes, hello. So ours is split into 2 parts, the College of Physicians of Edinburgh. I get to do the kind of slightly less exciting part, which is the sort of context and the background and the bigger picture, I suppose, of the work that we're doing. And then Jasmine, who will follow me, will tell the more juicy and interesting stories. So my name is Daisy Cunynghame, and I am the College of Physicians of Edinburgh's Heritage Manager. So I have the wonderful joy of looking after the books, the objects and the manuscripts. And I will get into what we have been looking at in terms of the stories of medicine and migration. So I wanted to start off by saying that the stories that we are uncovering, obviously it's great to talk about them in events like this. We're also putting them on our website, but we're also putting them into physical spaces within our college. So we have received funding to expand our physicians gallery, and there are a few sections within this expansion opening at the end of October this year, which look at topics relating to South Asian medical heritage. So there is a section within the gallery that talks about medical colonialism. So it looks at some of the topics that Liz has already touched on. So the role of medical missionaries in the medical culture in India, how British doctors could play a key part in the kind of wider colonialism and oppression that came along with that, how medical doctors' writing could reinforce or be used as tools for colonialism. But I should also say that we are, of course, including positive stories as well. So for the more recent history, we have objects from doctors, including Rosie Barua and Sunil Bandari, that talk about their experiences as medical practitioners. In our gallery, we also talk about South Asian medicines. So again, Liz has touched on this topic already, but looking at the plants which grew in Sri Lanka, Pakistan and India, how those have traditionally been used in medicine, how many of them have then been incorporated into British medical practice without the actual sources and historical understanding being acknowledged. And this is something that comes up over and over again, the tendency of European medical practitioners to claim to have discovered or invented something that actually has been in use for an incredibly long time in India or in Sri Lanka. And yeah, I'm sure everyone else on the panel has seen as well in the history books, and you start going, damn Edward Jenner or whoever, that perhaps they have the credit for something that actually has a longer, diverse history than is perhaps acknowledged. We have also had a placement student working with us, Devika Samanta, who's been looking at building a temporary exhibition around the use of quinine in India by Indian doctors, but also by British colonial doctors, and the impact that has had in so many ways. So quinine as an anti-malarial, fundamentally changing where people worked, where people lived, and kind of shaping the face of colonialism in a lot of ways. So that's going to be a temporary exhibition that we have coming up. We have also installed a permanent display of photographs of 7 early women connected with the college. A lot of this has come out of the work that Jasmine has done and we'll talk about. But in the slide here, I have put the QR code and the link. So if people do want to find out more about these women and their stories, you can go to that link. But I will briefly touch on 3 of the women that are on display in our college. So on the left side of this image is Lydia Dat. And like a lot of women, you'll start seeing a bit of a through line, I think, in terms of what both myself and Jasmine are talking about. There are a lot of women who came to Edinburgh or came to Scotland more generally from India, from Sri Lanka. They often had quite a lot of medical experience, and Dr. Dat was one of those people. They just needed that final step, that final qualification, which they could gain here, and then so often moved back to India, took that qualification, took that experience with them. So yes, she'd already studied medicine in Agra. She'd worked in a mission hospital there. She came to Edinburgh to study medicine in the 1890s, went back to India and worked in a leper hospital there. The woman in the centre, Kadambini Ganguly, was born in Bihar in East India, and she was really remarkable. She had a lot of firsts. First woman to study medicine at Calcutta Medical College, the first Indian woman to graduate and practice Western medicine in India. And she was a campaigner for women's rights and women's suffrage. And so often that comes up with early women doctors, that they are, not just at the forefront of medicine, but really actively campaigning for women's rights in a broader sense as well. And on the right is Rukmabai, and again, a really remarkable woman. She challenged her child marriage. She played a role in actually having the legislation changed to allow for divorce, and also in terms of Age of Consent Act of 1891. So she was again really kind of at the forefront of these movements. She worked as chief medical officer for a group of hospitals, and she wrote very interesting, and I think you can get it on archive.org, a really interesting little pamphlet towards the end of her life after she retired that was called Purdah and the Need for Its Abolition, and arguing that widows were unfairly kind of removed from society. So again, these really, really remarkable women. So just to put that into a bit of context, so there are a fairly sizable number of early female South Asian doctors coming to Edinburgh and coming to Scotland for a couple of particular reasons, and this is one of them. The building that you can see on this slide here is the Edinburgh School of Medicine for Women. If you're interested in finding it, it's opposite the National Museum of Scotland. It used to be a cocktail bar and nightclub called Revolution, but I believe it is currently looking for new owners. So if anybody wants to own a historic building, there you go. So this was established by Sophia Jex-Blake, one of the Edinburgh Seven, who you probably have already heard of, but just to very quickly say, the Edinburgh Seven were the first women to study any subject at any university in Britain. Unfortunately, they were not allowed to graduate. Both the male student body and the university essentially turned against them. But Sophia Jex-Blake had much grander plans. She set up this medical school, and it was the first of a number of medical schools set up in Edinburgh. And the reason why this is important is if women weren't allowed to study medicine at university, they could study medicine at these medical schools. And this is a close-up of the front of the building. The quote is, "Not for ourselves alone, but for everyone." So you are doing what you are doing for the greater good. That was the motto of the Edinburgh Medical School, not for yourselves alone, but for everyone. But this is really the thing that is the reason why so many South Asian doctors, and especially female South Asian doctors, came to Scotland. This is the triple qualification. And this was run by ourselves, the College of Physicians of Edinburgh, along with the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow and the College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. It was established in 1884, and really importantly, it allowed women to study medicine as equals with men. And they were very, very clear in their wording from the outset. This is a quote: "The curriculum and examination shall be of the same standard for both sexes, and the qualification is open to women equally with men." So this was from 1884. And it meant that women could study this qualification, they could become physicians, they could, be entered onto the medical register. And it was such an important way to get into medicine that women from across Britain, as well as across Europe and South Asia in particular, came to Edinburgh in order to study for this qualification. So that's why you see so many particularly women's stories that come out of this. It opened up access at a time when there really wasn't any other way for women to enter the profession. I've got 1 minute left before I need to hand over to Jasmine, so I'm going to talk so fast now. So just very, very quickly to say, in terms of what we are doing next, we are very pleased to have received funding to keep Jasmine on to do more research into this topic. So there'll be lots more outputs from us, more online resources. We've also commissioned a painting of Dr. Krishnabai Kelekar, who was another prominent public health reformer. She established a hospital in India, which is still open today. And that painting will be hung in our Great Hall, and we will have events and publications surrounding that. So this is the start of a journey for us in this research. And I will stop there, and I will hand over to Jasmine now.
Hi, I'm Jasmine. I hope everyone can hear me. So for the past around 6 months, I've been working as an archive assistant at the Royal College of Physicians, Edinburgh. I've been specifically working to compile and catalogue the college's licentiate records from 1858 and up until it's ongoing. But in this presentation, I'm going to talk primarily about the 19th century up until the turn of the century, similar to the period Liz was talking about. Working kind of so personally with the licentiate records has given me a really kind of interesting bird's eye view of the practitioners who are recorded in it. I've been able to look at connections across geography in cases where the locations of practice and birth are registered, as well as the process of grouping the data chronologically has allowed me to see shifts over time in a very kind of bird's eye view, big picture sort of way. I've also been working to make specific profiles of certain licentiates, and I've been using medical registers, government reports, hospital records, obituaries, a lot of family histories, and like heritage profiles online. Sorry, just trying to work this. Yeah. And so in this talk, I kind of want to talk about the diversity of different groups who were part of who became licentiates and were involved in these stories of medicine and migration. So to begin with, these are some of the kind of prominent colleges who became channels to people gaining licentiateship in Scotland. There's many more, but I just wanted to provide a map and show how kind of spread out they are. Yeah, from the sort of from the mid 19th century, as part of the colonial strategy. These Western-style medical colleges were established throughout the subcontinent with the goal to train the local workforce in European medical science and to integrate them into colonial institutions, extending the British influence into public health, the army, and administration. These colleges didn't just exist in isolation, they were connected to the global network of professional bodies, universities, and colleges. These for South Asian practitioners, the licentiateship pathway offered mobility, but was also shaped by the hierarchies of the colonial system, and allowed people to practice not just in South Asia or the UK, but throughout various regions. Yeah, this is just same thing. But the way we talk about South Asian practitioners can also often be quite reductive. And in my time working with these records, I think it's important to highlight the impact that not only like ethnicity as we might conceptualize it now affected people, but also aspects of religion, social class, caste, gender. These things really impacted people's journeys as doctors and the kinds of careers and professions that they had, even after gaining licentiateship qualifications. And I'm just going to, very similar format to Liz, I'm going to talk about several doctors to try and highlight different types of backgrounds. So this is Friani Kristanji Kama. She was from a very prominent and privileged Parsi family, born in Bombay, now Mumbai. She gained a scholarship to come and gain her licentiateship, and then she also studied in London and Brussels and conducted research at the Pasteur Institute in Paris. A lot of the earlier licentiates were from Indo-European backgrounds, for example, Anglo-Indian or Luso-Indian or Parsi, and these groups had more opportunities to kind of proceed with their medical careers in the colonial framework. And yeah, in this image you can see like her portrait, and then there's a Kama hostel for women that she established at the bottom. And then this is Dr. Idris Amir Gumani. He was born in Mauritius to a he was born in Mauritius to a Cochin Lascar family, which was like descended from West India, but they were like fishermen. His family were like relatively humble and had to take up personal loans to fund his education. Unlike a lot of the early licentiates, he wasn't able to gain any kind of scholarships. Yeah, and he returned to Mauritius and provided care during the smallpox epidemic, but died very young. He died at the age of 30, like a lot of the doctors. But he's like a very celebrated figure in Mauritius, and has a school and a addiction treatment centre named after him. And then Rukmabai, who has already been mentioned, she was a child bride, and she fought against her marriage, contributing to the Age of Consent Act. She's particularly interesting because her father was also a doctor and a social reformer, and supported her in challenging her marriage and in her medical career. She gained licentiateship, and after returning to India, took on positions at various women's hospitals, and was awarded the Kaiser I Hind Medal for her public health contributions. Then there's Dr. Umadram Lalbhai Desai. He was born to a relatively privileged Gujarati Brahmin family, and in Gujarat, he was sponsored by the Maharaja of Baroda to study medicine in the UK. He gained the Scottish Triple before completing an MD in Brussels. He conducted his thesis in South Africa, and on anti-venom, while serving in the IMS during the Boer War. He was there for nearly a decade before returning to India to become the chief medical officer in Banster State in Gujarat in 1898. He wrote pamphlets for the British government on epidemics. He also invented a screw bone perforator and patented bone wiring instruments, which are listed in the 1904 British Medical Directory. He was also very active in global networks. He was a member of the Theosophist Society and published extensively in their journals. So just in general, tracking the careers of licentiates. Sorry, my light just turned off. There's a lot of different. It's not a singular narrative. People's identities are incredibly diverse and affected, and their careers reveal the entanglement of race and class and gender, and individuals who are motivated by their own ambition and kind of unique positioning in this context. We're able to we're able to follow these global networks which bridged South Asia and the UK and often many other countries around the world. And it wasn't just a linear process. And then these are just some like links if this is going to be saved. Okay, on to the next person. Thank you.
Thank you so much there, Jasmine, and also to Daisy and Liz before. I'm just going to put myself here and hopefully do the right thing. I'm okay to close that presentation. Yeah, there we are. So I've done a slightly different thing with my presentation because I knew obviously the Edinburgh and London, we're going to be obviously looking at the research and telling lots of stories that are very, very similar to the Glasgow perspective. We've touched on the triple qualification, we've touched on the issues of hierarchical colonialism, the control of medicine in South Asia under the Raj. So I just thought that it might be useful just to give a wee bit of our context. There's me, I'm going to speak very quickly, and then I'm going to hand over to Monique, who will talk about her PhD work that she's doing, her research. She's then going to hand over to Grace, who is our portrait artist, and Grace will then hand over to Theba. So I'm going to talk quite fast, and as we've already said, this presentation is being recorded, so hopefully you'll be able to catch up if you don't quite keep on top of all this. So this is our college on St Vincent Street in Glasgow. Founded in 1599 by the surgeon Peter Lowe, working alongside a physician and an apothecary, and got the royal charter from King James VI of Scotland, who then subsequently became King James I of England. So we have this very sort of authoritative and important civic role within Glasgow, within Scotland, which is similar, I would say, to the other medical royal colleges. The royal being in the title kind of gives it away. And very much founded to improve standards of medicine and surgery in Glasgow and the west of Scotland. We are the only multidisciplinary medical college in the UK combining the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons, but we also have dentistry, podiatry and travel medicine within our college, and we've got over 15,000 members worldwide. And again, that's a history of empire and colonialism, the fact that we are established all around the world. Our collections go way back, spanning over 6 centuries, with our rare books, surgical instruments, manuscripts, etc., letters. We also have a fully accredited museum under Museums Gallery Scotland, and we run lots of different events over the years, throughout the year. So we decided to begin to look at ourselves, I guess. These sort of things have been cyclical over the years, but there's definitely a groundswell these days around looking at equality, diversity and inclusion. Obviously, there are things afoot in the world today where this is a very contested space, but what we're doing is about shining sort of a light on our past and looking at stories that, for I think many of the reasons have already been touched upon, have not been revealed, have not been researched, and this is very much where we're coming from. So we started these online discussions during the COVID years in 2021-22, reframed the name of the series, beginning to look at these subjects from different perspectives and not just from the standard sort of hierarchical perspective, historical perspective that perhaps had previously held sway. One of them being very much looking at this, beginning to look at the history of our first South Asian licentiates, again, as Daisy has touched upon. And in 2001 to 2022, we hosted an internship as part of the EDI and Scottish Heritage project with Museums Gallery Scotland and other partners. And we worked with a Glasgow University medical student who started to explore this history. So this is where we really start to kind of motor and begin to look at this and start to unpeel these layers. And it hasn't been a kind of a steady, story of this is what we've been doing non-stop. It's obviously there's a lot of dependence on project funding. And when projects come up. However, I think, we're all of us taking part in this session and alongside our colleagues in the sector this is where many of us our hearts are lying now, and where we want to go and we want to explore further. So it's sort of being opportunistic and taking advantage of such funding and such pots when they appear. And this is where we want to go. And as it says here, this project was about building capacity and anti-racist approaches to heritage. Continuing on, the college took part in the White Thinking project. Again, it was in the slipstream of the Empire, Slavery and Scotland's Museums report, which was carried out by Museums Galleries Scotland in 2022, which has made a lot of far-reaching recommendations about how we embed anti-racist working in our sector, and working with partners, Coalition for Racial Equality and Rights, the David Livingstone Birthplace Museum, Kelvin Grove, etc. So we're working with lots of partners on this, and so it's an ongoing process. This is Monique, who I will be introducing in a few minutes, but I just want to touch on the fact that Monique's work coming in, starting in 2024, as undertaking a collaborative doctorate under the University of Strathclyde with the Scottish Graduate School of Arts and Humanities, and looking at this hidden migration history, South Asian medical professionals in Scotland, 1872 to the present day. Monique is part of, and a very important part of, a continuum where our college and our colleagues elsewhere are very much now beginning to look at this research and to unpeel these layers. So I won't say much more because Monique will be speaking for herself in a few minutes. Another key point in our story, or key marker, is that we wanted to tell the story and to celebrate Dr. Jasmine Sen, who became our first female fellow of the college in 1912. Dr. Jasmine was born in what is now Bangladesh. She was taught at the Calcutta Medical College, and then went to work in Nepal with the royal family of Nepal for about a decade before then she travelled to, like we've said, she travelled to Europe. She came to Dublin and got her licentiate, and then came to Glasgow, and in 1912, standing on the shoulders of other women who had been fighting, knocking on the doors to get into our college as fellows of the college. So we wanted to celebrate and mark and highlight this achievement. Our college hall, like so many of these large rooms in our grand buildings across the UK, are full of portraits of white doctors, of white men, and very, very few women, let alone people of colour, let alone women of colour. And so in 2024, we made the decision that we wanted to actually celebrate and mark Jasmine's achievement coming in as our very first female fellow. And Grace, who I'll be handing over to after Monique. We're delighted that Grace is here today, our portrait artist, and will be able to tell us a bit more about her practice and her motivation and what she created in this beautiful portrait. And that portrait is now on the walls of our college hall, hung in 2024. And acting, I mean, we know it's symbolic, it's important, it's a posthumous portrait, but really important to have on the walls. And we hope, we'll continue to develop and grow and have more women basically on the walls of our college in future years. There's Grace. And it's important that, we celebrate all the different people who are involved. This is just some of the people that we're working with through University of Strathclyde and through other organisations across Scotland. And this is a collective approach. I think we're all coming at it from slightly different angles and perspectives, doing our own things. But this session today is sort of a call to arms. We're keen to work with others. We want to hear from others. We didn't know where we were going when we started the conversation with our colleagues in London and Edinburgh. And this is not the end, you know, we want to carry on and do more. And that's just a little symbol of the fact that we need to work in partnership and work together to keep this work going. So in that spirit, I shall now hand over to Monique, who can tell us more about your research.
Okay, thank you, Claire. And thank you everyone for coming along today. We're all really excited to have such a big audience for this project. As Claire said, my name is Monique Lerpinier and I am a PhD researcher at the University of Strathclyde. Today, I'll be sharing stories about some of the earliest South Asians to train in medicine in Scotland. This is the first time I've shared much of this research, and I think I've only have about 5 minutes to talk about it. So think about it as kind of a preview of what's to come. So Scotland was the second most popular destination in Europe, behind London, of course, for South Asian students to study medicine throughout the 19th and much of the 20th century. So it's important that we recognise Scotland's significance in this history. While my focus is on Scotland, many of the lives that I'll talk about are closely tied to the rest of the UK. And obviously this is just one piece of a much larger history with much more rich, in-depth themes, and I have quite limited time, but I hope it gives you a glimpse into some of the remarkable people that helped shape this history. So off to a bit of a rough start. Liz has already covered most of the history on Dr. Henry Goodeve, so I might give this a skip so I can get more into depth on the Scottish people. So Scotland was just a little bit behind London by about a decade. The first recorded South Asian student linked to a Scottish institution was Byramji Rustomji, who earned his MD from St Andrews in 1856. However, he never actually stepped foot in Scotland. St Andrews had a medical college in India at the time, and that was almost certainly where he qualified. So the first South Asian medical professional to actually appear in Scotland was likely Wazir Beg, who is pictured there, and he studied in Edinburgh from 1857 to 1861. Oddly, he didn't qualify there, but instead received his credentials from the Royal College of Surgeons of England. I don't know the reason for this yet, but I'm hoping to find out. Beg is also fascinating, though, because after qualifying, he picked up a Doctor of Laws, then he veered off into academia as a reader in Oriental languages at the University of Sydney in Australia. He also turns up in Freemason records. He was a reverend in New South Wales, and he had 2 children, all before dying at the age of 58. So he was a busy boy, but not quite the migratory pattern that I'm looking at. So finally, we reached the first South Asian who both studied and qualified in Scotland, Umesh Chandra Dutt. He got his double qualification from both of the Edinburgh colleges in 1866, but unfortunately, I can't really tell you much about him because he died just 4 years later in London, likely preparing for the IMS exam. So by the 1870s, things really started to pick up. Many South Asians came to Scotland to sit exams at the Royal Colleges, which were faster and more efficient than universities, meaning they could get into the IMS, sit the IMS exam sooner and get back to work in India. This was during Britain's so-called Indianization of the civil and medical services, driven by pressure from Indian leaders for better representation. In practice, however, Indian doctors often received lower-ranking posts despite holding the same degrees as their British peers. One exception was Dr. Zalnur Ali Ahmed, who is also pictured here, and he collected qualifications like they were souvenirs. He got the double qualification from Glasgow and from Edinburgh, RCS, I think, plus an MB and an MD from University of Glasgow. He became the first Muslim doctor commissioned into the Army Medical Corps, and he rose to Lieutenant Colonel. He served in several major campaigns, including World War I, and he earned multiple medals. Others were kind of less committed to the military life, but they forged their own careers. We've got Gopal Chandra Roy, who was the first South Asian graduate of the University of Glasgow. He joined the IMS before becoming a lecturer in Nagpur Medical College and published several papers. Then there was Banka Bahari Gupta, who qualified on the exact same day as Ahmed at the Royal College of Glasgow, making them both the first at the Royal College of Glasgow. He served as a civil surgeon and a jail superintendent, and somehow also found the time to write for the Dictionary of Economic Products of India, where he wrote about the medicinal uses of pineapple and the Indian gum tree. So as these doctors kind of became more involved and prominent in colonial administration, their political voices also grew louder and more organized. Some early doctors joined independence efforts, and notably in Bengal, the Brahmo Samaj movement, which also championed women doctors. Luckily, RCP and I think Theba will be talking more about these early women doctors, as I don't have time today, but I'm sure they'll do a grand job. One of the more politically active Scottish grads was Dr. Christo Dan Gose. He qualified in Aberdeen in 1871, and he returned to work in India's subordinate medical service. Despite a technically lower rank, Gose was a man of action. He helped a friend, Asutosh Mitra, get to Edinburgh, and Asutosh would later become Kashmir's chief medical officer. Gose also pushed for sanitary and public health reform in Bengal. Finally, we have Solomon Fernando, who is pictured there with his lovely mustache. And he was one of the first to qualify in Western medicine from Sri Lanka. Some people say he's the first, but I'm not sure yet. He got a double qualification from both of the Edinburgh colleges and a medicine bachelor's and surgery master's from Aberdeen. So Fernando's kind of interesting because he held a position at Aberdeen's Royal Infirmary for 5 years after qualifying, which was quite rare for South Asian doctors at the time to stay and work in the UK. But the most interesting thing about Fernando was that he allegedly died of a heart attack during a protest speech against the British colonial rule in 1915. I don't know much more about that, but I hope to find out more. So to wrap up and kind of bring it to the relevance of today and the situation today, the lives of these early South Asian doctors, sorry, there's a motorbike, highlight a complex period in British colonial history. Despite the many barriers, they built successful careers, gaining not just medical knowledge, but social capital enough to advance professionally and engage in politics. Understanding their stories helps us better grasp the era and challenge negative narratives around migrants today. From the start, Britain deliberately recruited medical workers from abroad to benefit their own population, yet some anti-migrant voices wrongly kind of portray this sort of economic migration as an insidious way to take jobs from British people, which is not true. And to that, the NHS likely would not have survived without migrant workers during the 50s, 60s, and ongoing today. So to connect this history with today, I'm interviewing South Asian doctors in Scotland to explore how their experiences compare with these early pioneers. So if you do know anyone who has South Asian heritage, has worked or studied in Scotland, I would love to talk to them and make this project as collaborative as possible. So yeah, I will hand over to, I think, Grace. Cool.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Monique. My name is Grace Payne-Kumar. I'm aware that we are a bit pushed for time, so I'll keep this brief, but please do feel free to reach out afterwards if you've got any questions. I'm going to talk a little bit about Jasmine Sen and my practice in relation to painting this commission in 2024. So I am a British Indian oil painter specialising in portraiture. I trained at Charles H. Cecil Studios in Florence, where I learnt the site size method, which I'll explain a little bit more about in a moment. I now utilise this methodology to platform individuals who have often disappeared in history or not been accredited the same privileges of an official portrait as their white male contemporaries. Some examples of this are my commissions of the first Lord Justice Clerk of Scotland, Leona Dorian, climate change activist Satish Kumar, and now Jasmine Sen. I subvert this traditional medium and historic techniques to push contemporary boundaries, challenge convention, and reframe narratives from culturally inclusive perspectives. I'm honoured to have been chosen to paint this posthumous portrait of Jasmine Sen, the first female woman and woman of colour, first female and woman of colour fellow of Glasgow's Royal College of Surgeons and Physicians. Visiting the college in 2024, I was really struck at how big of an impact this portrait would have in a college hall of entirely white male faces. Okay. By using the site size method, Jasmine is embraced into this canon of influential and celebrated figures in a wider history of British portraiture. This method is a process pioneered by old masters such as Titian, Reynolds, Rembrandt, later popularised in the 19th century by John Singer Sargent. The method consists of positioning the subject besides the canvas and viewing both at a distance. And this allows the artist to see the overall light effect, training the eye to kind of perceive form without distortion. This process was carried out with a combination of photography, some of the remaining photographs of Jasmine, and mannequins to create a realistic depiction of Jasmine at the age that she became a fellow. Visual representation such as this is vital for demonstrating mobility and aspirational paths for minority groups. Portraiture, a medium kind of traditionally reserved for the noble and wealthy, is rooted in this lineage of status. I've included a couple examples of these kinds of portraits by Sargent and Velasquez. As for me, this portrait is a symbol of resilience and ambition, having overcome the socio-political barriers to gain a fellowship as a woman of colour in 1912. And as a woman of colour myself in a predominantly white industry, I'm truly inspired by Jasmine's conviction to break the glass ceiling with her professional achievements. This painting is based on one of the only surviving black and white photographs of Jasmine, in which she is draped in a sari with the lace collar and a puff sleeve, a visual depiction of her involvement in the UK and her Indian heritage. The puff sleeve and lace collar evoke connotations of Regency-style portraiture, visually elevating her social standing. And I chose orange lined with gold as the colour palette of her sari to symbolise wisdom and optimism in the face of adversity. And there's a certain joy in the bright, warm hues of the material, which is also a nod to the rich, vibrant textiles of India. For her gaze, I aim to convey a sense of tenacity and hopefulness. The book she's holding is a motif of her diligence to her studies, and the watch is a depiction of a gift that she received from the King of Nepal, to which she was his personal physician. Jasmine is noted as having said, "I have a lot of responsibilities to my sisters in my country," which I think highlights, her dedication to women and children's health in taking responsibility to protect and cure the women of India. She has made a significant impact for future generations as a surgeon with feminist ideals. It's so important to celebrate these stories, to inspire other young medical professionals and creatives. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be entrusted with immortalising her memory through this painting. So thank you for your time. I'll hand over to Deepa.
Well, good evening, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for such a lovely introduction. My name is Deepa Krishnamurthy, and it's a joy to be here with you all in a space that we've shaped together to share both our collective and individual journeys. For me, that journey has been a deeply personal quest to uncover the hidden histories of the first South Asian women doctors. I'm a decolonial public health academic and a physician based here in London, and over the past few years, I've been piecing together fragments of these early pioneers' lives and weaving them into historical narratives for the Royal College of Physicians Museum. This work is a labour of love for me, recovering stories that time has tried to erase, stories that for me were a personal necessity. As a Sri Lankan Tamil woman standing at the crossroads of multiple and sometimes conflicting identities, woman, medic, academic, Sri Lankan Tamil, British, I've often felt the uneasy tension of those selves that refuse to fit neatly together, a tension that surfaced most acutely for me in medicine. And perhaps because I'm one of the first in my family to navigate this path without a map, charting unfamiliar waters alone, or perhaps because of a deeper wound, the painful intersection of my community's story with the lingering shadow of colonial medicine still etched in that collective memory. So a few years back, I decided to step away from clinical medicine and return to my community and my diaspora to pursue some research. And during that time and that space, I could finally find the words to ask about that growing quiet ache, that dissonance that I'd been carrying for years. What does it mean to be a woman of South Asian heritage and a doctor? The absence of an answer, well, that kind of became my starting point. And my journey began virtually while I request access to archives, and with the generous support of heritage teams in London and Glasgow and Edinburgh, who kindly opened their doors from afar for me. And there is where I found many of my firsts. And as people before me have mentioned, some of the firsts include Dr. Kadambani Ganguly, who in 1883 became one of the first 2 women graduates, not only in India, but also in the whole of the empire, to graduate from university as a woman. She later became the first Indian woman to practice medicine in India in 1886. Shortly after that, Dr. Annie Jagannathan became the first Indian woman to enter the British Medical Register in 1890. Similarly, that year, Dr. Rukmabai Rao enrolled at the London School of Medicine for Women, where Dr. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson was dean. She earned her Scottish triple qualification in 1894 and her Doctor of Medicine in Brussels in 1895. 3 years later, Ceylon followed suit with Dr. Alistair Burr, who became Sri Lanka's first woman doctor in 1898. As I was returning back to the NHS, I now had all of these stories, life maps of the first, offering me guidance, language to make sense of my own experiences in the present, where previously I had none. Earlier this year, in March, I had the honour to travel to Glasgow and Edinburgh to retrace the footsteps of these early women doctors in person. I was able to walk the streets that they once walked, see the lodgings that they once called home, the licentiate books as well I once admired from afar. I was finally able to hold them in my own hands, a book that these women signed over a century ago. I still remember seeing Dr. Rukmabai's signature amongst a whole ledger full of names. There she was, just a single name. She signed it as Rukmabai, no surname. Imagine meeting someone like her in the flesh, in real life. She sounds like she will be one incredible personality. And it's that experience, being in those archives, accessing that material, that made me feel that the past was so tangible, close enough to touch, as if I were reaching out to them. And yet it also sharpened my awareness on the silences that still remain in our history. A while back, my father, who noticed my growing interest in medical history, brought home a book about the origins of Western medicine in Sri Lanka, in the Northern Province specifically. It detailed the contributions of early white male physicians like Dr. John Scudder and Dr. Samuel Green, as well as early white women doctors such as Dr. Isabella Kerr. It celebrated generations of Sri Lankan male physicians such as Dr. Milroy Paul, and yet made no mentions of the early Sri Lankan women doctors. Though that erasure pained me, having already written the stories of these other pioneers, I understood that this was a failure of recording, an unconscious blindness of sorts, rather than a true absence of early Sri Lankan women doctors. And this search, it led me to Dr. Nalama Williams, who you now see on the screen. So Dr. Nalama was the first Sri Lankan Tamil woman doctor, having gained her Scottish triple qualifications in 1910. She was also an early advocate for women's suffrage. In 1919, she proposed a resolution calling for women's right to vote at the first session of Ceylon National Congress. She also boldly spoke out at meetings and at events, against orthodox politicians who insisted that women's place was within the domestic sphere. With the story of Dr. Nallama, I was able to piece together fragments that were scattered through the archives, also digitized pieces of information such as newspaper clippings and a magazine that had some occasional photos, and one of which was where she practiced medicine, which you can see now on the screen. The architecture of this hospital oddly felt familiar for me, and it was in the small print at the bottom of the image that I realized why it was so familiar. This is the very hospital where my grandmother gave birth to my father and my aunts. And it was that discovery that kind of, honestly, I couldn't explain the feeling. It felt like I was finally painting in the gaps of my own history. And there are still so many questions I have and I want to ask her, but also ask them all. However, not all answers are here in the UK, and not all archives are digitized as of yet. And I believe there is more to her story and more to all of their stories, perhaps tucked away in a forgotten box or scattered across distant archives. And it's this curiosity alongside the painful awareness of their erasure that drives me. Their absence shapes how women today see themselves, and especially for those navigating medicine without a blueprint. But uncovering their story, well, that I feel could be like an anchor, a lifeline, a source of strength for us all to draw from. And I'm hoping one day that I can continue this journey in Sri Lanka to uncover more about Dr. Nallama's extraordinary life. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Siba. That was just wonderful, and a really lovely way for us to end our session today, from a personal perspective, and hearing a powerful, meaningful contribution, and bringing the past to the present, you know, the legacy of or the colonial days, showing how important that it's the tangible past, you said, the under research, the impact and the legacy. So I'm delighted that, you know, and considering also that you kick-started this session really by reaching out and helped to kind of pull a lot of the threads together, which is why we're all here today, basically. So thank you so much to you, Thiba, for that.
Oh, thank you to you all.
And thank you to everybody else, from Liz and Daisy and Monique, and Grace, and Jasmine for all your contributions. I hope that everybody feels that we've given quite a rounded picture. Obviously, it's a partial picture, and Thiba, you said about the lack of digitization. There's a lack of resource and capacity. We're all trying to do this work on top of all the other jobs that we're trying to do. There's not enough people doing this, and that's why we felt that this was really important to bring this, to raise the profile, and to share where we are. So I'm very aware that we've got about 4 minutes left, but I felt that everybody needed the time and space to be able to say what they had to say.
So we haven't had any questions as yet, just a lot of appreciation for all our wonderful speakers, which is great. But if anyone does, if they'd like to type them in, we'll keep an eye on them. But I think, Claire, you mentioned at the beginning you had some questions yourself that you wanted to ask some of the other speakers.
I do, and kind of just simple questions, really. I thought I wanted in my wee presentation to talk about how we started, where it came from with us, why we started, from the Reframed series, and you know, we're doing work before that, but how it sort of started to build a bit of a head of steam and momentum with us. And I wondered, going back to Liz, perhaps in London, first of all, with all the great research that you're doing there, I wondered why, actually, because you obviously predate, you know, your research has been going on a while. What brought you to it? What was the motivation and the impetus? Had any of this work been done previously? And what are you kind of hoping to do next?
Yeah, so this is sort of building on the work of previous curators, and I think in particular Larry Jones, we were sort of looking at our own records from a decolonising history perspective, and we often get asked, who are your first physicians of colour? And owing to how inspiring physicians or monks' role was recorded, ethnicity is not always apparent. So some of it is looking at archival records where we can trace that information, and I was inspired by some of the things that Glasgow have been doing. So the licentiate lists have been a godsend, because that is where you see a lot of the South Asian names come up. And yeah, so building on the work of other curators, historians, I'm very interested in the work that's going on about challenging the quote dude walls of a very homogenous sort of white male physicians. And again, it's inspiring to see Grace's painting up at Glasgow. And I would absolutely love for a similar portrait to be hung in London. And I've been looking at Dr. Dosabai, Dana Boy's biography, her also being the first woman licentiate for us as well. So that's how it really came about for us, sort of building on what other people have been doing.
I did have another question, just generally. Has anybody got any dedicated funding for this, or is it? I kind of know the answer to this, I think, but you know, there's no. All right, I'll answer it. There is no dedicated funding. There are no dedicated curators or researchers or archivists who are just, you know, assigned this role. And we're all trying to find pots of money to make it happen. But you know, I can stand to be corrected on that. Has anybody got anything that they want to throw into the pot regarding that? What about you in Edinburgh, Daisy?
No, we don't have dedicated money. We have to take money from other projects to fund this work. But I think, you know, the training that you and guys in Glasgow and we in Edinburgh have done, the Museums Galleries Scotland sort of anti-racism training. I think one of the really key things that changed all of our mindsets coming out of that was going, it's strange that for so long we viewed this as something that was optional to look at. It's not optional. We have to do this. And so, you know, we find the money because it is so important. And going back to what you were saying, Claire, about what is the impetus? Well, our impetus in many ways has been the same as Glasgow and London, but I suppose that so much at the forefront of our mind is the fact that obviously medicine is so incredibly diverse, and we are all membership organisations, and so our job is to represent our members and for them to feel welcome and for them to feel like the college is their college. And so we are doing this in part, at least for our members, to make sure that the diversity that they experience is visible.
Yeah, that's exactly where we're coming from as well. Gail, you've got
we've have a question through from Ajitha, who wondered if the archives, I'm assuming it's generally any of us who wants to take that, reflect the challenges that these doctors face living in England and Scotland. I don't know who wants to take that one.
Monique, maybe.
Sure. I would say you really have to look for it. Like, there's this veneer of like meritocracy very much in like college archives, and I think if you want to look for where these people were systemically or even individually discriminated against, you have to look to memoirs, you have to look to maybe what kind of jobs they were having and what they were paid for those jobs in comparison to other people. So I don't know if that's the same for other speakers here, but that's kind of what I found.
Yeah, definitely. So the last doctor that I mentioned, BC Roy, what I did include was when he is trying to get an appointment at Bart's Hospital in London, he's turned down by the dean for being an Indian, and it takes him sort of multiple times of trying to be persuasive to secure that appointment. And then also with Dr. Frederick Akbar Mohammed, sort of being Anglo-Indian himself, the discrimination he faces and how others talk of him, describing his, quote, oriental features, that even sort of his mentors and other doctors are sort of commenting on that. In the First World War, his descendants, one of them becomes a doctor also, and there's this period of extreme xenophobia, and they change their name, so they're no longer the Mohammed family, they become the Dean family. So absolutely that of, it may not be reflected in the institutional records, but dig a bit deeper in the personal memoirs, you will find it.
Yeah, I found the same as well. So with the archives, especially with the triple qualifications, you can find little clues. So you can find out a list of the lecturers that the female licentiates would have come across and studied under. And then if you looked at the lecturers who would then have their own bios and a lot more written about them, you can then piece together what that interaction would have been, because they would have probably written a bit about their attitudes towards women in medicine. And then you can try and guess what the story or the underlying tensions may have been there.
I'm just aware of timing, everybody. I'm so sorry. You know, I think we're probably over ambitious with so many speakers, but you know, you were all fantastic. And I hope everybody watching online agrees that, you know, it's been a really fantastic session. Gail, you've got your hand up.
Just wanted to say one last thing is Matthew Jaron has shared, there's a project in Dundee. I will share the link with everyone called Woven Together, with some of their South Asian medical students and stories. So I'll make sure everyone gets a link to that as well.
Thank you, Matthew.
So we didn't miss that before we left.
Yeah, and you know, as I said earlier, this is like a call to arms, and we want people to know that we're doing this work and to share, and we don't know where we're going collectively, but you know, we're all hoping that this might be the start of something wonderful. And that we can maybe come together in a bigger way. Maybe there'll be a conference one of these days and we can all actually meet in person. So, you know, this is the start, and that's the kind of key point we want to make. I just want to say a huge thank you, and in particular to Liz and to Gail for making this happen. Thank you so much for sorting out the technology and just enabling it. So, you know, and we're going to hopefully have the recording hosted on your site as well. Gail, there's a feedback form we're looking at as well. Is that going to get sent out to everybody?
Yeah, that will be sent round. I can see some people have had to drop off the call already, but those of you who are still with us, yeah, we'll send round the feedback form to everyone, and we'll let you know when the link is available for watching the recording back or sharing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. If anybody has anything last that they want to say, otherwise, I think we'll wrap it up. But thank you so much, everybody. And let's look to the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Claire.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.